Kia ora and welcome. My name is Ellyn Rose and this is the Creative Cure to Boredom. I've created this channel to share and explore some inventive approaches to art using everyday materials you can find in your own home. The hope is that it makes the current lockdown and isolation situation just a little bit more bearable. Today we're going to have a look at turning sewing to sketches. All you'll need is a needle, some thread and a thick piece of paper. Hope you enjoy. So to start with, I've got a photograph that I downloaded from the internet and I've printed it out and I've just put some pencil on the back of it and I'm using it basically like tracing paper. So that pencil on the back is going to leave an imprint when I go over the top with a pen. And you can't see it particularly well with this camera, but there is a very faint outline of the shape on the paper. It's a nice cheap way of doing transfers. Rather than working how I'd normally work, which is across the whole page, because I've got this stencil outline, I'm actually just going to work in one area and then move on. So I'm starting with the left eye. And already I'm getting a feel for the thread going in some places where I really want it to, and sometimes going a little bit askew from the actual line that I want. I'm making some shadow marks to the right of that eye, and I'm taking that up into the eyebrow but to make a sort of point of difference between the shadow and the eyebrow, I'm doing the eyebrow quite chaotic to make it look more hairy. And I think this quality of line to try to differentiate between shadows and forms could be easily avoided too if you use different types of colours. So if I did a grey cotton for all of the shadows and just used the black for the actual line work of features on the face. So when I'm threading the needle, I'm just basically looping it over and tying it in a knot. So I'm actually using sort of a double thread when I'm sewing to make a slightly thicker line. And then I'm just tying it off twice at the end when I'm done with it, through some of the other threads at the back. And that's just to secure it. These are just a couple of marks so I get an idea of where the hair starts over the ear. And then I'm continuing to bring that shadow down on the left side of the face. Again, I've decided to change up the line making slightly with the beard. To give a slightly different texture. It's those crevices that you can see going up and down on the side. I'm taking that beard mark making up those to try to emphasize them just a little bit. When going up the center of the nose there, I'd done that design so I could have a clear idea of what was a medium shadow and what was a dark shadow. But the reality is there is no solid line there, so I do think it disrupts a little bit to the actual feel of the portrait. And I realised I really didn't have to do a solid line for all of the features on his face. So you can see with that bottom lip there, I've decided to do a dotted bottom lip instead of a full bottom lip. And when I'm going down the bottom to his neck, again, I've decided to just leave a really basic line there rather than doing a real detailed sort of version. I think if I were to spend more time on this, I would do some of those up and down sort of lines going from basically halfway through the page to the right side of the page, just to get that real light and shadow effect going on. But for now, these pencil outlines, these pencil-like outlines with the thread are good enough for what I need. And you can see I'm constantly checking from the front of the page to the back of the page as far as where the needle's going, and also making sure it's not getting caught on anything. So now I'm starting on the up and down, I want to say vertical, but they're not necessarily vertical lines, going up and down on the paper on the right side to articulate those creases and definition and that shadow on the right side of the face. So now that I worked out that sort of technique from the left side of the face, I'm finding it a little bit quicker to do the right side. But I will say that this picture took a lot longer than I expected it to. So I actually ended up working for about 5 hours on this piece. So it was quite time consuming, but it's also a first attempt at this style of art making. So I'm sure if I tried it again, I'd be a little bit quicker and I'd know a few little handy tricks as far as getting the sort of line that I wanted for each area. I am using quite thick paper, and part of the reason why I'm using thick paper is to make sure that I don't tear through it when I'm using the needle. Now, the bigger needle does give me a slightly bigger hole, so it does require pushing a little bit more onto it. But a thinner needle, I was a bit afraid that with a thinner needle, because they're slightly sharper on the end, I'd end up pricking my finger too many times. So I feel like the needle I chose was a good size. Certainly if you go too much bigger, you might be at risk of tearing the paper even more. So I'm starting the right eye. And I'm following again the line work that's already on the page. I'm also trying to match it to the first eye to make sure that I don't have any inconsistencies there. I don't want one half of the page looking completely different to the second half of the page. I decided to add some little creases above his eye on the right side, and I decided that was lacking from the left side, so at the end I'll go back and I'll add those lines on the left side as well. And I'm actually really starting to like the reverse side of the paper, so the side where all of the ends of the threads are and everything. It makes for a really interesting image. So I'm working back into the eyebrow now, trying to mimic the same effect as the left side. Again, trying to make sure that the picture feels like it's not lopsided in any way. And I do think that the eyebrow effect is working quite well in the picture. It does read as eyebrows, which is great. And with the hair, I decide instead of doing complete detail that I'm just going to pick out some of the shapes that are happening and highlight them. So obviously the more dense you use the thread, the darker it looks in that section, so it really does emphasize it. Like this little sort of crown at the top of the right side of the page. And as you can see in the picture, there were some mistook holes from time to time. So there are some random holes with no thread going through them. But hey, that's okay. This is just a trial and error. So this is the final result. There are some things that I'm quite happy with and some things that I'm less happy with. Some of the shading, for instance, I quite like this shading going up and down on the side here to represent the shadows on the side of his face. However, I'm not so much of a fan of this sideways shading in the middle. And part of that is because I've created this border around it, and that really stands out quite differently to how his face actually appears. So it makes it look a little bit more blocky, which isn't what I was going for. But the more I used the thread, the more I sort of got an understanding of how it could be used to sort of create the shapes that I wanted to. So I do wish that I sort of spent some time just playing around with this before I started this video, but that's also what this video is about, just to show some trial and error actions within the piece. So I quite like how his hair's working out, and sort of what I realized by the time I got to the hair was that, you know, I didn't need to complete all of the lines. I could do part lines, and it was suggestive enough of the flow of his hair. So I quite liked that too. I'm very happy that I did the basic pencil markings at the start. Otherwise, I would have lost my place several times in the piece. But overall, I think there is some resemblance to the photo. It's not picture perfect, but I'd love to hear what you've tried with this process too. And I really wanted to show you the back of this as well. I think that that's really interesting. It's almost like an expressionist version of the same drawing. So don't forget that sometimes the reverse of things can be even more interesting than the right side up. Just a different perspective on how to look at it. But yes, I would love to hear if you've tried a similar sort of experiment. So please do leave comments or suggestions below. My name is Ellyn Rose. This is the Creative Cure to Boredom. Till next time, ngā mihi nui.